Demonologist is a first-person multiplayer horror game where you explore haunted environments and try to guess the type of ghost correctly based on the equipment you can use. It's in early access and available on Steam. This is a first impression review made with a few hours of playtime. Atmosphere. It's difficult to talk about the game without pointing out its similarities to Phasmophobia, and Demonologist lifts so many ideas and gameplay features straight from Phasmophobia that it's difficult to ignore. Even the terminology is the same. Knowing this, let's move on. Like its influence, the game is incredibly dark and initially foreboding thanks to the house design, with many haunting things lurking around in the background or just being visible behind a locked door. There's always a little tension to begin with as you poke and prod at the house to try and reveal where the ghost is.
You managed to piss me off.
The real problem with the game is that the gameplay loop requires you to revisit the first house several times before you can unlock a new one, and the atmosphere generated by the music isn't strong enough to make the house foreboding on the second or third visit to it, like Phasmophobia. On repeated visits, it becomes quite clear that a lot of the ominous things lurking in the background do very little, and then they just fade in the background as set dressing. Another big drain on the atmosphere is how the ghost feels less of a real being haunting the place and more of an artificial-like series of scripted events, like it is. The gameplay loop hurts the immersion and reveals the seams of the game, almost destroying the atmosphere by the third visit. There are lots of times that me and my friend were bored walking around the house trying to find the correct room because the atmosphere just wears off very quickly. It becomes boring the more often you're forced to revisit the same abandoned house to grind out enough points to move on to the next location, and the atmosphere isn't strong enough to maintain it. That's no Harry Masons. Scares. The game's scares are almost exclusively scripted events, and there's a lot of interesting ones, and there's generally enough that they often catch you off guard. However, there's a lot of problems with them. Choosing scripted events to begin with means that the game is limited by that choice. Things don't change, and the more times the player enters the environment, which they will a lot thanks to the gameplay loop, the more they will witness the same things. It's destined to desensitize the player to the main source of scares. Another problem is that the events happen throughout the house regardless of the ghost's preferred room, which was misleading as it's part of the objective to figure out which room is the one that the ghost is in. In the several hours spent playing, we only witnessed a ghost a few times, and it was pretty frightening mainly due to its design, which was pretty unique, as were the death animations. But the vast majority of the scares were repeated each time that we returned to the same house. A lot of it was also struggling to identify the room and then getting bored. Demonologist has a lot of interesting ideas, but the gameplay loop is so restricting that you'll be returning to the same house over and over again and seeing the same things. That's still no Harry Masons. Sound design. Demonologist sound effects steal the show. Creaks and groans really stand out, and the rest of the sound effects are realistic enough. The directional audio for the environmental ambient sounds like water dripping is perfect, but many items from the environment are just difficult to pinpoint, with something like a door swinging being hard to locate when you can't see it in the game's dim flashlight circle. The music is a different story, and whilst it has unique events that play music only one of you can hear, which was by far the most unique thing the game does, the music is very low in the mix and easily missed. It's more of a whispery ambient drone that intensifies randomly. There's some words from the ghost that are unsettling, but that's as far as the voice acting goes. It's fairly unremarkable. Overall, the sound design is decent for the most part, but lacking in others. That's one Harry Mason. Gore. The game's gore consists of blood in the basement and a random corpse, which logically can't have anything to do with the ghost, since it's a different ghost each time, and the room isn't the same each time either. They aren't interactable, and whilst their appearance is quite morbid, it's ultimately needless. That's still one Harry Mason. Story. The game didn't really present a story, which isn't too bad in this scenario and might get added later, but there's generally nothing to latch onto story-wise at all, making the final score 1 out of 5 Harry Masons. I played this for about an hour and a half with a friend and we did not have a fun time. The game is sort of a clone that doesn't manage to utilise the right ideas from its influences to make something worthwhile, and whilst it's using gameplay, items and terminology that are lifted straight from Phasmophobia, it doesn't manage to nail the atmosphere or the scares.